Morning everyone, it's Mrs Hudson again today. We're on to chapter 4 now, The Workhouse. Hope you're enjoying the story so far and that we're making it interesting and fun for you. Well done, and thank you to the people who've responded already and sent emails with their predictions and their word definitions as well. We'll crack on with today's chapter. Jim and his mother walked for most of that day, but they made very slow progress. They rested a bit near a statue of a man on a horse, and after a very short distance they had to stop again for Mrs. Jarvis to scoop water from a fountain. And on they went, trudging and stopping, until Jim's mother could go no further. She put her arms round Jim and pressed her head down onto his shoulder. "God help you, Jim," she said. It seemed to Jim that she was simply tired then of walking, and that she decided to go to sleep there on the pavement. He squatted down beside her, glad of a chance to rest, feeling dizzy and tired himself, and was aware of a worry of voices round him like flies buzzing. Someone shook him, and he opened his eyes. "Where do you live?" a voice said. Jim sat up. Already it was growing dark. There were people round him, and some were kneeling by his mother, trying to lift her. "We used to live in a cottage," said Jim. "We had a cow and some hens." "Where do you live now?" It was a different voice, a bit sharper than the last one. Jim tried to remember the name of the street where they had rented a room in Mr. Spink's big house, and couldn't. He couldn't understand why his mother didn't wake up. He looked round for his bundle and saw that his wooden horse had gone. He clutched Lizzie's old boots. "You haven't got nowhere?" the same voice asked. Jim shook his head. Someone was doing something to his mother, rubbing her hands. It looked like dabbing her face with her shawl. "Get them to the workhouse," someone said. "There's nothing we can do for her." "I'm not taking them there," another voice said. "Prison would be better than there. Tell them we caught the boys stealing and let them put them both in prison." "Someone stole my horse," Jim heard himself saying. He couldn't keep his voice steady. "I didn't steal anything." "Give him his horse back," someone else said. "It's all he's got, ain't it? A pair of boots what's too big for him and a wooden horse. Give it back." There was a burst of laughter, and some children broke away from the group and ran off. The next minute there was a shouting from the far end of the street, and the people who'd been crouching round Jim and his mother stood up and moved away. He heard other voices and looked up to see 2 policemen. "Get up," one of the policemen ordered. Jim struggled to his feet. "And you, get up," the other one said to Jim's mother. She lay quite still. The first policeman waved his hand, and a boy with a cart ran up. Between them, they lifted Jim's mother onto it. Jim watched, afraid. "Take them to the workhouse," the policeman said. "Let them die in there if they have to." The boy began to run then, head down, skidding on the snowy road, weaving the cart in and out of the carriages, and Jim ran anxiously behind. They came at last to a massive stone building with iron railings round it. Weary people slouched there, begging for food. The boy stopped the cart outside the huge iron gates and pulled the bell. Jim could hear it clanging in the distance. At last the gates were pulled open by a porter, who glared out at them, his lantern held up high. "2 more for you," the boy said. "One for the infirmary, one for school." The porter led them into a yard. There on the steps on each side of the main door stood a man and a woman, as straight and thin and waxy-faced as a pair of church candles, staring down at them. The boy held out his hand and was given a small coin, and the master and matron bent down and lifted Jim's mother off the cart and carried her into the house. The boy pushed his cart out, and the porter clanged the gate shut. The matron poked her head sharply round the door. "Get in," she told Jim, and pulled him through. "You come and get scrubbed and cropped." The doors groaned too. They were in a long corridor, gloomy with candle shadow. In front of them a man trudged with Jim's mother across his shoulder. "Where's Ma going?" Jim asked, his voice echoing against the tiles like the whimpering of a tiny, scared animal. Where's she going? Infirmary, that's where she's going. Wants feeding and medicine, no doubt, and nothing to buy it with neither. Can I go with her? Go with her? A big strong boy like you? You cannot. If you're good, Mr. Sissons might let you see her tomorrow. Good, mind. Know what good means? The matron closed her ice-cold hand over his and bent down towards him, her black bonnet crinkling. Her teeth were as black and twisted as the railings in the yard. She pulled Jim along the corridor and into a huge green room where boys sat in silence, staring at each other and at the bare walls. They all watched Jim as he was led through the room and out into another yard. Joseph! The matron called, and a bent man shuffled after her. His head hung down below his shoulders like a stumpy bird's. He helped her to strip off Jim's clothes and to sluice him down with icy water from the pump. Then Jim was pulled into rough, itchy clothes, and his hair was tugged and jagged at with a blunt pair of scissors, until his scalp felt as if it had been torn into pieces. He let it all happen to him. He was too frightened to resist. All he wanted was to be with his mother. He was led back into a huge hall and told to join the queue of silent boys there. They stood with their heads bowed and with bowls in their hands. There were hundreds and hundreds of people in the room, all sitting at long tables, all eating in silence. The only sound was the scraping of the knives and forks and the noise of chewing and gulping. All the benches faced the same way. Mr. Sissons stood on a raised box at the end of the room, watching everyone as they waited for their food. Jim was given a ladle of broth and a corner of bread. I don't want anything, he started to say, and was pushed along in the queue. He followed the boy in front of him and he sat on one of the benches. He glanced round him, trying to catch someone's eye, but none of the boys looked at him. They all ate with their heads bowed down, staring into their bowls. The boy next to him sneaked his hand across and grabbed Jim's bread. Jim ate his broth in silence. After the meal, the man with the hanging head gave Jim a blanket and showed him a room full of shelves and long boxes where all the boys slept. He pointed to the box Jim was to sleep in. Jim climbed into it and found that he only just had enough room to turn over in it, small though he was. He tied Lizzie's boots to his wrists in case anyone tried to steal them. The dormitory door was locked and they lay in darkness. During the night, an old woman prowled up and down the room with a candle in her hand, holding it to each boy's face as she passed. Jim could hear boys crying, stifling their sobs as she came and went, little puffs of sound that were hardly there at all. He lay with his eyes closed, the candlelight burning red against his eyelids as she approached and stopped by him. He could hear her snuffly breath and the creak of her boots. He hardly dared to breathe. He lay awake all night thinking about Emily and Lizzie and worrying about his mother. He longed to see her again. If she was better, maybe she could ask Mr. Sissons to let them go. As soon as it was morning, the door was unlocked. Old Marian's place was taken by the bent man. He shouted at the boys to queue up in the yard for their wash. I've already broken the ice for you, he told them, so no thinking you can dodge it. Jim ran after him. The man was so stooped that the top half of his body was curved down like a walking stick. And when Jim spoke to him, he swung his head round to look at the boy's feet. Please, sir, Jim said. I'm not sir, the man said. I'm only doing my turn like the rest of them. I'm only Joseph, not sir. He swung his head away from Jim's feet and spat on the floor. I ain't, sir, same as you. Please, Joseph, tell me where the infirmary is. Why should I tell you that? Joseph asked, his eyes fixed on Jim's feet again. Because my ma's there, and I've been good, Jim said. Mrs. Sissons said if I was good I could go and see Ma in the infirmary today. So you was the boy as came in last night, and your ma was brought on a cart? Yes, said Jim. Please tell me where the infirmary is. Joseph made a little chewing noise. "Well, it's upstairs," he said at last. He rubbed his nose with the back of his hand and tilted his head sideways, squinting round at Jim. "Only the message I was given by Mrs. Sissons is, don't bother taking the boy up there because his ma—" He stopped and shook his head and chewed again. "Your ma's dead, son." So, end of chapter 4, and a sad ending to chapter 4. Sad times for Jim. Jim's now in the workhouse all alone, and Ma hasn't actually made it. So what do you think's going to happen next to Jim? Is he going to stay in the workhouse? How's he going to be treated in the workhouse? And what about the character of Joseph? I think there's a bit more of Joseph to come from the story too. Our activities on the weekly timetable next week will refer to the chapters that we've read so far and things that have happened, and get you to start thinking about some of those things and responding to them. So hope you've enjoyed listening to all of the chapters this week. We will continue with the chapters again next week, and keep listening. Bye.